that one of the reasons there are so few converts is because for a season, most of them are under a judicial hardening from God. That's the point of Romans 11. And in order to support it, he quotes this psalm. Let me give you the tip-off in verse 7 of Romans 11. What then? Israel failed to obtain what it was seeking. The elect obtained it, and the rest were hardened. Similarly, verse 25, lest you be wise in your own sight. He's talking to Gentiles now, to us mainly. There are Jewish people in this room, I know some. He's saying to Gentiles, lest you be snooty about this and wise in your own sight, I want you to know and understand this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. And then it's going to change. May it change soon. Now, in that context, verses 9 to 11, he quotes the psalm. And he says, and David says, he's simply giving biblical warrant to what he just said. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap and a stumbling block and a retribution for them. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see and bend their backs forever. So, how does he interpret David? As a sinful vendetta against personal enemies? No. He interprets David as a reliable expression of what happens to the adversaries of God's anointed. A reliable expression of what happens to the adversaries of God's anointed. David was God's anointed king, being rejected, persecuted, reviled, reproached, saying the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. And now the Son of David comes into the world, Jesus Christ, and he too is rejected. What happens to those who continue in rejecting the Lord's anointed? Answer, they will be damned. And it will be right that they be damned. And we will approve of their damnation. And it is fitting to want that to happen. Paul does not hear emotional words of retaliation in David's voice. He hears sober, prophetic words of judgment that God's anointed wills to bring his adversaries into judgment. That's why he quotes these words in Romans 11, to make that very point. The adversaries of Christ, the Messiah of God, are going to be darkened and hardened as part of God's judgment. So that's the first way the New Testament quotes this psalm. They quote it as the words of David, giving expression to what will become of those who bring reproaches upon the Lord and his anointed impenitently to the end. Second, the New Testament quotes this psalm more often as the words of Jesus, and here it becomes amazing to me, because it implies how Jesus so deeply lived in this psalm. He's the son of David, and the reason they quote the psalm, and he quotes the psalm as his own words, is because what the original king and anointed one and David did was a foreshadowing of what the last David and the last anointed one, Messiah, will complete in fuller measure. And so he took it as his own. Let me give you 4 illustrations. Number 1, John chapter 2. 3 of them are in John, one of them's in Romans. So we'll look at John 2:13. You don't know the story. Jesus is driving out the robbers from the temple. Actually, they don't think they're robbers, and he's driving them out. In verse 16 of John 2, he says, he told those who sold pigeons, Take these things away and do not make my Father's house a house of trade. Now that phrase, my Father's house, very important, and his disciples are watching this happen and listening. He said, my Father's house. And they're watching what he did, and he's so angry. He looks like he's been being eaten up by zeal. And as soon as they saw those words and made that connection, bang! Psalm 69 is in their mind. They know their Bibles. These are Bible-saturated people. Psalm 69:9 is quoted in verse 17 like this. His disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. So in David's words of zeal for the temple, and then they watch Jesus with passion and zeal driving out these pigeon sellers and saying the very words of the psalm, and they knew, whoa, this is Psalm 69 in fulfillment. Number 2, John 15:24. Jesus is being hated by the leaders of the people. And this time he explicitly quotes Psalm 69 as part of God's law. Remember 5 weeks ago we talked about the man who meditates on the law of God, and we argued that law meant instruction. Here's a place where law in the Old Testament refers to the Psalms, which shouldn't surprise us once we know that it means instruction. If I had done, I'm at John 15:24. If I had done among them the works that no one else did, if I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have seen and hated both me and my Father. But the word that is written in their law must be fulfilled. They hated me without a cause, which is a quotation of verse 4 of Psalm 69. More in number than the hairs of my head are those who hate me without cause. So Jesus himself is aware of David. He lived in this psalm. He watched David unjustly persecuted, and he watched what would become of such people in judgment, and David's approval of it and his desire for it at a certain time. If there were time, I'd go into the patience of David. It's not in this psalm, but in the Imprecatory Psalm 109, it talks about how long David loved his enemies before he prayed this way. So Jesus is watching that, then he watches the things around him, and he's structuring his life in a living out of this psalm. Number 3, this is from at the cross. And it's going to be a quotation from Psalm 69:21, and the text is John 19:28. John 19:28 to 30. The psalm had said in Psalm 69:21, they gave me poison for food, and for my thirst they gave me sour wine to drink. What did David mean by that? We don't know. He doesn't give us the situation. Somehow his adversaries were acting in a way that brought him to say, they gave me poison for food, and my thirst, they gave me sour wine to drink. And Jesus here's where it becomes almost incredible, that Jesus now is hanging on the cross. Okay. This is the worst way of dying that there is. You don't think when you're dying this way. You scream and you try to breathe, and how in the world do you